What is the most unhealthy thing you've seen a human do? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. There was a player at the casino who used to come in his mobility scooter, order Red Bull and vodka over and over, smoke unfiltered Camels, and play 3 video poker machines at a time for 48 hours. He weighed 380 at least, hated the entire world, and ordered food only from the fried chicken place. One day I went to wake him up and he was dead, so I'd go with that. Story 2, I once saw a guy spraying spray paint in his mouth to get high. Normally when people do, thus they would use some fabric to filter everything except the gas, but well, he didn't. And his mouth was sprayed in black paint. Would not recommend getting high like that either way. Story 3, I was behind a person in a drive-thru once. She was in an SUV and it sagged on the driver's side. Half expected the suspension to break. She ordered a medium ranch dressing. The person taking the order was understandably confused, so the lady figured it would help to scream her order. Finally, she said, "A medium drink cup filled with ranch dressing." She pulled over to the side after she got her food. I passed her on my way out and she was taking a huge bite of her burger and drinking the ranch as a chaser, like it was actually her beverage. I have not eaten ranch dressing to this day. Story 4. I once watched someone with a food addiction shoving food into their mouth so fast they hadn't chewed what was already in there, and some fell out when they opened their mouth to take more bites. They started shoving the food in with their fingers and kind of compacting it so they could chew. They were also shaking the entire time they were doing it and snorting because they could barely breathe. It was horrific. Story 5. When I was a teen, I was a drunk. I would often go days without eating. One time I blacked out, woke up at home, ran to my toilet and started puking. Little did I know when I opened my eyes, I'd be met with dark black and brown coffee grounds. My toilet was filled. It was on the seat everywhere. I had no recollection of my day. I continued to puke before cleaning up and going to bed. I continued to drink for 6 months after, continuing to puke coffee grounds occasionally. I never got checked. I mentioned it to my doc a few hours later, 18, and he said I'd probably burned a hole in my esophagus that started to bleed into my stomach. Since the symptoms had stopped after I quit drinking, he didn't investigate further. Edit. Before PPL asked, where were your parents? They're junkies. I lived in the trap. I was fucking off by example. Edit 2. While people are reading this comment, I want to say thank you for the kind words. I was a very young girl, and it was scary for me. The fact that I continued to drink was hurtful to look back at, and the countless times it happened after. As a mother now, I recognize how little I was. No child at that age, 12, 17, should put themselves in the dangerous situations I found myself in. I appreciate everyone who's wishing me well. I wish every child who walks this earth alone the safety and luck I have had. Story 6. My dad smoked 4 10-packs of cigarettes a day, drank a 12-pack a day, ate a combination of sit-down and fast food at all times with beanie weenies as well, slept about 4 hours a night, and at one point was whoring around with, by his claims, 14 prostitutes. This went on for most of 30 years. He stopped the smoking and drinking after his second near-death experience. The prostitute situation kind of dwindled in the 2010s. He rotates between 3 or 4 women, depending on who's pissed off at him. He also had recurring skin cancer for 23 years and spent 3 years in prison, which did blunt the drinking. He had a buddy supplying him cash for smokes, though. He's dangerously close to living an average lifespan, which begs the question, just how long would this medical Highlander have lived if he didn't spend 30 years trying to kill himself? Oh, and he's extremely anti-weed. He fired his maid over what he thought was a weed vape. Google said it was a nicotine vape. Story 7. Wouldn't say it's the worst thing I've seen, but a girl around 22 I worked with for about 2 years said she has only drank coffee and caffeinated drinks for a good 10 plus years, never drank water because she didn't like it for some reason, complained often about having headaches, stomach pain, joint pain, overweight, eye issues, and various other issues. Kept on her for the duration of me working there, and towards the last 6 months of being there, I noticed she had a half-gallon water jug and asked her why the sudden change. Said she went to the doctor the other day and told me all of the things the doctor said to change. Namely, quit caffeine and drink, eat healthier. By the time I left, she lost a good amount of weight and basically never complained about the issues said earlier. Another one I witnessed was from an ex-girlfriend. She had been drinking well over a 12-pack of Mountain Dew with minimal water a day for around 10 years. Doctor told her she was forming a hole in her stomach from the excess soda drinking. Never stopped her, though. Story 8. I was parked in a Walmart parking lot somewhere in the Fort Lauderdale area while eating some lunch on the way to the Florida Keys while on a road trip. I saw a guy that had just come out of the store walk into a brushy area about 15 feet wide between the parking lot and the main road. He took a can of compressed air out of his Walmart bag and huffed it until he got so dizzy he stumbled and fell over into a bush. I lost sight of him and was wondering if I should check on him or just call 911. About 5 minutes later, he got up, looked around, pulled his Walmart vest out of the bag, then, presumably, went back to work. Story 9. I worked at Starbucks in college. We had a morbidly obese woman come through the drive-thru every weekday morning. Her order, venti 6-shot white chocolate mocha with 11 pumps of syrup, whole milk, coat the inside of the cup with caramel sauce, whipped cream. I believe we calculated it to about 1,500 calories. Story 10. Drink bleach, then pour the extra all over himself. Didn't believe it, so walked up to smell the bottle when he started walking away. Sent him to the hospital. This was in the middle of the day on a popular street with lots of foot traffic. Talked to someone in the area and they said, the guy does it all the time. 10/10 for cleanliness. Story 11. Someone with such unmanaged diabetes that they have had 6+ surgeries removing toe after toe, chunk of foot after chunk of foot. She has stubs for feet now. No toes, and she continues to eat sweets and fast food. She's basically immobile now unless she has special shoes on and uses a walker, which she usually chooses not to use. She sleeps sitting up on her couch. Her adult children provide all of the sweets and food for her because she is her own person. If she wants it, she can have it. Ita. She had a quad bypass a year and a half ago, and multiple people brought her cookies and jams in the hospital. Story 12. I had a patient once get an infection in a very small surgical wound that started out as 1 centimeter wide. Well, he knew something was wrong, but didn't get it checked out until he couldn't lay on his back anymore. He had a flesh-eating bacteria called necrotizing fasciitis that ended up eating his skin from the middle of his thighs all the way up to his middle back. It was so bad that when he came into the hospital, he was given about a 30% chance of surviving. I'll never forget that smell. Story 13. I was in an alley in a rough area of town with some colleagues shooting a scene for a video project. I saw a man who was probably close to my age slowly work his way along the wall, looking for and finding used drug needles. When he found one, he would inject it into his arm and push the plunger down, for what I assume was the last small amount of that might be still in the vial. It was extremely hard to see. It's the saddest moment I've ever witnessed. Story 14. I've told this story on here before, but here goes. I'm a retired paramedic, and one night years ago, we got a call for a 20-something-year-old with cardiac symptoms. Based on the area we worked, this generally means crack-induced chest pain. We arrive at a terrible little SRO building and are directed up to the second floor. Our patient is crawling towards us, and upon seeing us yells, "Get me a priest." My bullshit meter is ringing at full volume, but all the other residents are coming out to see what's happening, so we carry him down to the ambulance to evaluate him. I ask his medical history, and he says a 5+ syllable word that I hadn't heard since medic school. Aubrey, I clearly remember thinking. We put him on the monitor and he's in atrial fibrillation. Not a good heart rhythm, not the worst, but weird for someone so young. At about 180 beats per minute, entirely too fast. We get an IV, give a drug called amiodarone with a bunch of fluids, and dude perks back up pretty quickly. We ask him what he was doing when his symptoms started. This proved to be a mistake as it did incalculable psychic damage to my partner and I. He explains that he has been in and out of the hospital all week. The first time he went in was for the exact same thing. Upon discharge, he asked the doctor how to prevent this from happening again. The doctor gives a basic answer of don't do, limit caffeine, no nicotine, drink plenty of water, light exercise, good diet, etc. Dude gets home and can only remember that the doctor said to drink lots of water. He downs almost 3 gallons of water before his salt levels are relatively so low that he calls 911 again. Upon discharge in the urinary 2, he asked the same doctor how to avoid this happening again. The doctor, who I'm sure was dumbfounded, tells him something along the lines of don't chug 3 gallons of water. Upon getting home, he remembers the doctor as having said not to drink water. 2 and change days later, We get the call because he has not had a drop of any fluids since his hospital discharge. We take him back to the same hospital for the third time, and the triage nurse immediately sprints up to us, asking what brings him in this time. She was impressed, but not surprised to learn why. Story 15. Shampunaniawine. In high school, a kid put paint thinner in an empty can of chewing tobacco and would huff it with the strength of 3 Kirby's. He was ripping at it for an hour straight for days in class, so who knows what that did. Story 16. As a toddler, my grandmother babysat me every day while my parents worked. This was in the 90s. I wasn't given juice or milk, just regular Pepsi, all day every day, so I of course started having panic attacks at age 4. Story 17. I once worked with a frequent flyer with alcoholism whose teenage son had to drive to the hospital for detox. She would always be bloody from her falls. I heard from a coworker that they found her deceased in a restaurant parking lot on their lunch break, bottle still in hand. Story 18. I once knew someone who lived on only energy drinks, instant noodles, and cigarettes for months. Barely slept, constantly stressed, and refused to go to the doctor, even when they were clearly crashing. It was like a slow-motion train wreck. Story 19. On video, I saw a guy cough so hard I thought he was going to die on camera for at least 2 solid minutes before pulling out a cigarette, lighting it and inhaling half of the entire cigarette in 15 seconds, then said, "Whew, I almost lost my breath there." My brother worked as a medic and transported a very large person home from the hospital. He said they was very nice and tried helping explain how the last guys were able to carry her up the steps. He said they finally get her on the couch and their partner began delivering them food and drinks from the kitchen via a remote-controlled car with a tray on top. He said the first 2 items were a 2-liter of Mountain Dew followed by an entire rotisserie chicken, and the food kept coming until they left the house. He said that the ye was straw that broke the camel's back and he could no longer watch the horror of society on a daily basis and quit. Story 20. I knew a new age type of woman who, against all advice, decided she didn't believe in the necessity of modern medicine and decided to do an all-natural home birth. She went on and on about the miracle of motherhood and her natural instincts and absolutely refused logical warnings from everyone in her life. She had no help and no screenings, such prenatal care besides probably waving crystals around and drinking leaves. Her birth plan was watching some videos and her baby daddy and her planned to do a water broth at home. Unfortunately, her baby was born in her home, early with a lot of complications and didn't make it. How this isn't considered neglect or murder, I'm not sure. The woman herself almost died from bleeding out. If her mom hadn't rushed over and intervened, she absolutely wouldn't have survived. Story 21. Knew a chick that would pop about 40 Vicodin a day. She got pregnant, continued to eat Vicks like candy, swore to us her doctor told her to not quit smoking pot or cigarettes because it would stress the baby. I felt so bad for my buddy that knocked her up. Kid turned out with half her brain being soup. She just screeches all day. It gets better. He knocks her up again. She continues her behavior. New kid needs to wear a helmet because his head flat spotted because she just left the little guy laying on his back all day and did nothing with him. I lost all respect for dude after that. Story 22. I watched my best friend's cousin shoot morphine. She offered me some, but I declined, which is good since I found out during a later medical procedure that I am allergic to opiates. I have zero social awareness, so I sat beside her and asked if I could watch. She walked me through step by step how to do morphine. It was educational. Story 23. I had a classmate when I was in kindergarten whose parents used to let him stay up all night and then send him to school with one of those Starbucks fraps you can buy at the grocery store and a pack of Twinkies for breakfast every morning. Story 24. A coworker who lives on the espresso energy drink, IPA food pyramid, 4-H sleep, triple shot latte for breakfast, 16 Oz Monster for lunch, 2 beers to relax, rinse and repeat. Basically substituting liquid anxiety for meals and calling it a wellness plan. Story 25. I ran into an old friend who had not done very well at all. Just had a rough go of it. Petty crime, the whole shebang. I saw him one day and he asked me for a ride to go to court for something he had done. I don't know, it wasn't far, totally walkable, and I had to decline. I actually would have, but I was on the clock. We talked for a minute, and when we parted, he asked if he looked okay, as in presentable enough for a court date. I was like, yeah, you look okay enough. He actually did. To which he replied, good, thanks. This had me so stressed out, I've been up all night drinking beer and smoking crack. Considering how he spent his evening, he did actually look okay. I haven't seen him since, and I heard from a friend that he's out of jail and in a sober living house. I genuinely hope he's good. He's a sweet guy, just has a lot of issues. Story 26. Nen. Children get ripped off of mouthwash. Some guys I knew from the local music scene we grew up in were coming to Memphis for a reunionish type of thing. Talked my friends here into going. I was excited to see them again. When we get there, their bassist is sat on the sidewalk playing chess against a homeless guy. I asked the singer what was going on. If Zach loses, he has to pay him $1. Neat. He gave up, paid $1, and everyone went inside for the big show. I'll play with you, and we moved over in front of a gas station, and I gave it my best. The only thing that mattered was our game of chess and the things we spoke of. Beat him, then he challenged me back. At the start of the second game, he was looking at me sheepishly. I drink mouthwash. Do you mind? I offered to buy him a beer and put it in a big gulp cup, but no, he has made his choice. Said police give him trouble if he smells like beer, so I went in and got one, a beer, not mouthwash, to drink with him. Drinking on my cold beer, I told him about my love woes, what I was doing, what was in my messenger bag. Sipping on his mouthwash, he told me about being in prison, his daughter that will never speak to him again, and that he was too late for the shelter. Said he had a spot in a ditch he liked, though. That old magic, where you sit a spell and time stops existing. It was getting late and I felt bad for holding him up. That's right, we're 1-1. We gotta find out. Now he got a little mouthwash in him in that second game, and he beat the piss out of me. He wasn't mad for losing before, just more letting me know. Third game was a breeze. This dude was fucked up by then. He didn't want the $1 for the win since I bested him, so I slipped a little cash in his backpack when he wasn't looking. I do not recall his name. He is most likely a number and in the ground now, but I'll never forget the night I battled the homeless chess master. It was a very lovely evening. My friends were mad I skipped the show. Story 27. One day someone introduced his brother to me. After his brother had gone, and we were talking about him, he told me that dude hadn't drank a single glass of water in the last 3 to 4 years because he refused to drink anything else than Coke and beer. Justifiably, he was really worried about him, and I stood there jaw down trying not to laugh because I couldn't believe what he just told me. Story 28. Watched a known diabetic take a big bag of chocolates out. They ate those Lil chocolates that you would pass out at Halloween. Afterwards, a pile of wrappers was next to them. Afterwards, they clean up their pile of wrappers and reach back into their work bag and pull out a zipped bag. They pull out a glucose machine and poke themselves to check what level shows. They are surprised at high reading and give themselves an insulin shot. Story 29. 25 years ago, my SO said he had a hereditary allergy to penicillin. His mammy had told him. Penicillin allergy is not hereditary. Every year he had tonsillitis, sometimes multiple times, and suffered loudly. He visited the doctors and A&E many times, always telling them he was allergic to penicillin. If the conversation ever got to the point where anybody tried to tell him that wasn't possible, he threw a patty because his mammy was right. He is a big, intimidating man whose mammy was being insulted. They dropped it. Our children were very young when he got hospitalized with a secondary infection, sepsis. His mammy insisted on coming to help. She seemed to be enjoying the possible death of her son. She was not helping me. After 3 days of trying everything but penicillin, he was going to be taken to intensive care. My phone rang. Could the doctor speak to Mammy? She explained the hereditary penicillin allergy, that his little brother has an allergy to penicillin, so he must as well. 15 minutes later, penicillin given, the SO started to recover. 24 hours later, he was coming home. 10 years later, and he's never had tonsillitis since. And the hereditary allergy, his mammy was allergic, so it was perfectly valid. He might have had an hereditary allergy. Sigh. Story 30, I was in Afghanistan. We were in a village all hiding, waiting for some big head honcho Taliban guy to supposedly show up. And just as the dawn breaks, this lady comes out of her front door, takes one step to the right of the front door, lifts her dress and shits right on the ground. Then some minutes later, there's an explosion as the people we were supporting started their capture mission, and the man of the house sprints out the door and makes a hard right, slips on the turd the lady just left right there next to the front door, and eats it hard enough to need an American medic to call an evac for a broken leg and a severe head injury. And then the paperwork. Good Lord, the sworn statements as I had to repeatedly debrief what happened to the guy. So, long story short, Shitting right next to your front door is the most unhealthy thing I've personally seen a human do with my own eyes. Story 31. One of my first jobs was at a popular sub-sandwich place. They were open late. One late night, a huge guy walks in, probably like 6'6", but for sure over 350 rupees, and it was mostly in his very extended stomach. He looked in his 40s maybe, but was visibly unhealthy looking, strained breathing from standing and just not looking good at all. He asked for a sandwich with every meat we offered and absolutely no vegetables, okay? Then he asked for double mayonnaise on the bread, okay? Then he asked if we could layer mayo in between the different sheets of meat. I feel like that guy didn't last long after that night. Story 32. A guy at work long time ago before I retired snorted a giant line of asbestos. He was wasted at the time, trying to prove it's not bad for you, I guess. He was messed up. Would walk around with a jug jungle juice in a coffee cup all the time, drinking it all day. Dead now of an alcohol. Story 33. Saw this dude bring a knee-high bottle of nose and started hitting it non-stop until he froze over and turned blue. Everyone just stared at him. Was wild. Also went to a wedding once. Saw a woman in a skin-tight dress. She was hot. Turns out she was a bodybuilder. Later into the night, the roof rage hit. She punched a little woman over the face for complimenting her drink. Story 34. I work for an ENT. We had a patient come in for burns to the inside of his nose. When asked how the burns occurred, he admitted to smoking while on oxygen. He had thought he was told not to smoke due to his lung cancer, and apparently had no idea that it was actually because his oxygen tank was flammable. Similar story I shadow in the ER as well. Had a patient present to trauma with burns to the face and arms and damage to the lungs due to smoke inhalation. Turns out he tried to light a gas stove with a match while on oxygen, and his tank exploded. Showed me how lucky the first man was, as his injuries were far more extensive. Story 35. Every 2 years, I do a tour in the Arctic Circle for sample gathering. Old guy on board who was only there the first year I got the position, always seemed kind of thin and a little neurotic. Turns out the guy was a pack-a-day smoker with a borderline unlivable addiction to heroin. Dude would go to the designated smoking deck when most people were eating, shoot up, and then toss the needles overboard. What blew my mind is the guy was only caught on our way back into the Hudson Bay because a nearby fishing vessel saw him do it and hailed the captain to let him know. Never saw him again. Blew my mind considering it's a conservation expedition and the guy was just tossing needles into the ocean. You gotta love your job to be out there. It sucks and life is. But the dude's addiction was stronger than his love for the job, I guess. Story 36. In my early 20s, I was a barista at a coffee shop that was so new it was still undergoing some last bits of construction, and I made a construction worker a latte. He shot me a snaggletooth grin, stirred sugar into his latte using his screwdriver he'd been actively working with, then downed the latte. Story 37. My husband was in the army with a guy that would clear a 174 bottle of vodka per day, plus extras like Four Loko, while not taking his epilepsy and antidepressant medications, all while at work too. He is no longer in the army. Story 38. I saw a naked man running down the side of the highway in the rain biting the neck, and I assumed trying to drink the blood of a roadkill raccoon. I questioned my sanity after seeing this until I verified it by finding the story on local news later that night. Story 39. A partially eaten hamburger got lost in the skin folds, look up the word panis, of a morbidly obese woman who was my patient in the ER. The meat went bad and the bacteria was absorbed through the woman's skin, getting into her bloodstream and making her septic. I think she died, not sure though. I shipped her up to the ICU. Best part was I brought a leftover hamburger for lunch that day. Story 40. I work in a restaurant a couple years back. Had a customer or a large glass of ranch dressing. He put a straw in it and drank it like a beverage. Recently, I went to a grocery store to pick a few things. Lady in front of me had a cart full of Elbows macaroni and a whole lot of S-cheese. She informed the cashier she was making homemade mac and cheese. Story 41. It was me. I saw half a bar of butter in the fridge and thought, why not? Took it out and started munching on it. Halfway through, I was already feeling pretty wretched, but I was too lazy to go back to the fridge, so I ended up finishing it. Needless to say, I woke up several times in the night feeling like I was about to die and wishing that I did. Story 42. One of my old friends would smoke at least a carton of Marlboro Blacks every 2 days. She was only 18. On top of the she did various and drank like a sailor. Last time we talked, she apologized to me for doing, and I told her I couldn't be around her any longer. I have no clue how she's doing. It's been nearly 8 years. Story 43. In the late 90s, I had a roommate who was a great friend as well. We went through a lot of military training together. He was staying with me because his wife was a cheating whore and they were getting a divorce. I was 24 and really into fitness. I still am at 51, and I was eating clean to get cut for the upcoming beach season. We were stationed in San Diego. Being single, I wanted to have a successful summer. Winkify now what a man wink. Well, I made dinner. Baked chicken thighs with a side of green beans and mushrooms and brown rice. I yelled to him dinner was ready and sat down to eat. I heard him rummaging around in the kitchen, and then he sat down across from me with the following: can of Pepsi, a block of cheddar cheese, and 2 Pop-Tarts. I was dumbfounded. I had cooked a great meal and he chose that? Well, the next year he took orders to Florida and we lost touch. Last year he hit me up on Facebook and we reconnected. I FaceTimed him and he weighs 400 and 5,500 pounds now and was talking about weight loss surgery. I chided him while he was complaining about his weight that maybe Pepsi, block of cheese, and Pop-Tarts for dinner weren't the best choice to make. Story 44. My ex-father-in-law would chew tobacco, smoke a cigarette at the same time, and drink a daily 30 case of beer. He would swallow his chew spit and remaining tobacco after his dipping session. When asked why he swallowed it, he would respond with, "Keep the cancer guessing," and slap his stomach. He ended up with prostate cancer and lost one of his testicles. I found it comical that after all that talk, he lost a nut. Story 45. I know a dude who drinks 3-4 bottles of wine a day while smoking cigarettes more or less constantly for presumably the last 35 years and counting. His teeth are purple from the wine. And yet he goes on hikes in the woods with me and my friends, holds down a full-time job as a professional chef, and regularly breaks up fist knife fights at the local dive bar. I just don't get how he remains alive. Story 46. A family member of mine that was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in his 30s would constantly forget to take his medication, forget to check his blood sugar levels, refuse to eat anything healthy at all. No meat unless it was heavily processed, frozen, or fast food. No fruit, no vegetables. Barely any protein unless it came in the form of McDonald's or Burger King. He'd eat plates full of Cheez-Its for breakfast and candy like it was nothing. Not only that, but he also refused to shower unless we forced him to, which was once a week. And most of his teeth were either missing or rotted out, not just due to the excessive sugar consumption, but also due to the fact that he simply refused to brush his teeth, even as a kid. His excuse for this, quite literally, being that he was allergic to toothpaste. I know it sounds like I'm making this post up, or that I'm just describing the average Redditor, but I promise it's unfortunately 100% real. Eventually, he neglected his health so badly that he got a severe infection in his foot, caused by a broken bone in his toe, which spread so much that he had to get part of his leg removed, all the way up to his knee. He spent months in the hospital and in physical therapy bars rehab, could no longer work a job, and had to use a prosthetic leg. He also had issues with his vision. He eventually began eating better and taking his medication regularly after that, but would still go on these bizarre sugar binges from time to time. One day, we were throwing away an old package of Freeze Pops which had expired, and he took the entire thing, waited for it to melt, cut each one of them open, poured them into a tall glass, and then drank it. Story 47. Watched a homeless man in Seattle, who was on some very hard, catch a massively fat, sickly, possibly dying rat. He took it in his 2 hands and took a massive bite out of its stomach and spit the biggest glob of partially chewed rat guts and fur onto the sidewalk in front of him, all to the sounds of the rat shrieking and an elderly lady screaming in protest. He discarded the now dead rat on the sidewalk in front of him, next to the partially chewed flesh chunk, and then drank water out of a small dirty puddle at the entrance to the alleyway. I have seen a lot of nasty stuff on the internet and in person, but watching them mindlessly do the most foul thing imaginable gave me and still gives me such a stomachache. Story 48. Went to a blues festival in Mississippi, and a couple hardcore dudes were completely shit-faced off windshield washer fluid, like carrying around gallon jugs of blue fluid and taking swigs. Guy offered it to me, showing me how it's only 2 and full of alcohol, like he discovered a clever hack. For those unaware, alcoholic beverages have ethanol, which gets you drunk. Windshield washer fluid has methanol, which is highly toxic, and causes brain damage, blindness, and death. Story 49. A friend of mine once ate a giant bowl of Count Chocula cereal, but it wasn't chocolatey enough, so he added Cadbury mini eggs for crunch, and when that still wasn't enough chocolate, he doused it in Nesquik chocolate syrup and a splash of chocolate milk, all the while guzzling a 1L bottle of Pepsi. It was 7:30 in the morning. Story 50. I knew a girl who kept fainting every time she had sugar and refused to get checked out. Keep in mind, we live in one of those commie countries with healthcare coverage and cheap insulin. She just didn't want to be diabetic. So she figured she'd just have sugar in places she could safely faint for a bit and then back to herself. Lost touch with her, but it's been 10 years or so, and I know she's still alive, so at least there's that. Story 51. When I was a kid, the mosquito truck would drive around in the evenings, emitting a thick, white fog of pesticide. One time, a kid rode his bike in the plume for a long distance. I think he may have attached his bike to the back of the truck somehow, maybe with a rope. I guess he thought it was interesting to ride in that impenetrable white cloud. I remember him later in high school. He had a permanently nervous tick in his face, and he was really skinny. Story 52. I'm a chef. One time, about 20 years ago when I was just starting out, I was working at a pretty nice place, and a famous chef came to do a special dinner collaboration. My chef worked with the guy years back. So the guy showed up, and I know we've all seen overweight people and also obese people. This guy was what is known as morbidly obese. He was so overweight that he didn't really walk around. He had a little electric scooter that he would scoot around in. At one point, I needed some milk for a recipe, and I went to the dairy cooler to get some. The scooter was parked outside the cooler, and when I opened the door, the chef was sitting in the middle of the floor, chugging cream right from the container. I'm talking full-fat cream, 46% butterfat. He slammed about a quart, killed the container, handed me the empty, and waddled out. I fully expected him to have a heart attack later when we were cooking the dinner, but he was still alive when I left for the night. For the longest time, I couldn't open a container of cream without thinking about that guy. Story 53. In high school, this guy that we barely knew, he was friends with the guy I was dating and went to a different school, was hanging out with our group one night. He sat down at the table and pulled out a fifth of Jack Daniels, said not one word, opened the bottle and drank the whole thing in maybe 4 swallows. We were all like, WTF was that? He sat there for about 10 minutes just staring straight ahead, got up to go outside, fell straight through the door, down the steps and rolled under a truck. Another friend of a friend loaded him into his car and drove away. He never said one word to anyone there. The whole situation lasted maybe 20 minutes tops. Never saw that guy again. That was in 1987, and I still think about it to this day. So weird, so unhealthy, so unhinged. Story 54. Evidence of past events likely. A girl in our barracks in Japan had a hat for every intimate male visitor, FROM Navy and Air Force, and who knows, her room was a hat display for a year of activity. It was an impressive trophy, set to say the least. She worked in my platoon, never hit it, never wanted to. Story 55. Old gentleman out in the country had a buck stove going in his garage shop. He was fixing up used cars inside. He was burning wood and plastic. The smell inside was acrid. I had to step back outside almost immediately. He either shortened his lifespan by a good amount of he's unkillable. Story 56. I saw a roofer cutting concrete roof tiles all day without a respirator while chain-smoking Pall Malls. The wind was blowing the dust directly in his face, and he was sitting there all day just hacking his lungs out till he eventually threw up on the roof. I freaking begged that guy to use some PPE, but he refused. I swear I got silicosis just watching him. Story 57. A guy in Delhi smashing 3 plates of Golgappa like it's a sport, sweating in 100-degree heat, standing right next to an open sewer. Then grabbing a street samosa, no napkin, same hand he just scratched his armpit with no shame. To top it off, a glass of roadside sugarcane juice with that rusty-ass machine that looks like it hasn't been cleaned since the British left. And still, man had the nerve to tell me, "Don't drink tap water here, bro, it's dangerous." Legend. Story 58. I used to work in a psych ward, and we'd be here all day if I told you everything we dealt with. What I will say is we had a problem with people eating out of common area garbage cans. Then they'd complain about being sick, and it's like, that's what happens when you eat rotten food. Cue blank stare. Story 59. I saw someone get washed up for bedtime, brush their teeth, clean jammies on, fresh glass of water by the bedside. Except this bedtime was after they had been drinking vodka sodas, maybe 12 over 5 hours, a few lines of Coke during the 5 hours. Then at bedtime, they took an Ambien with a shot of vodka and then pulled out a tray to take a bump, snorted the stuff, and then said, "Whoops, that's not Coke," and then laid down and went to sleep. Story 60. I once was helping out at a high school wrestling tournament where we had a buffet type of meal for the hospitality room. Parents donated the food. I made and brought deviled eggs and sausage that was left over from the team breakfast. Eggs left over. I boiled and made them into deviled eggs. We also had fixings for sandwiches, desserts, soups, etc. Basically a little bit of everything. Before the tournament gets started, in walks this very overweight older gentleman who tells me he is one of the busiest drivers. He proceeds to make himself a plate that was overflowing. I noticed it included about 6 deviled eggs. When he finished, he went through the line and once again, his plate was overflowing, but this time with deviled eggs and sausages. I watched this man eat a dozen eggs in total and about 2 lbs of sausage. He stood up to make a third trip when our AD stopped him to politely let him know we needed to save the food for all the others as no one else had gone through yet. The guy sat down looking upset. About an hour later, a coach comes in and grabs a water. As soon as he did, this gentleman got back up and filled up his plate with all of the rest of the deviled eggs. It was only after he had finished them all that he left the room. No one else was able to even have the chance to get one. Story 61. I manage the healthy and beauty department at a Whole Foods. Honestly, not a bad job. Great pay and benefits considering how easy the job is. I get the most out there hippie bullshit on a daily basis. I had one lady ask me where the arnica cream was. Okay, normal enough question, so I show her, right over here. She comes back with, "Is it okay if goes near an open cut?" Yeah, should be fine, just don't get it inside it. And it's good for bruising, right? I got this cut on my leg and it has a big red bruise around it that keeps growing and burns. Yeah, you need to stop all right now. Leave here and go to the ER. Oh, I don't trust doctors. I can't help you anymore. The only thing I feel safe telling you is to see a doctor. I can't legally tell her it's an infection that's spreading into her blood because I'm a grocery store employee and law prevents me from diagnosing. But she is adamant she won't go to a doctor. I tried. I have dozens of doctor phobia stories, a few where I'm 99% sure they died. Some fun ones are, diabetes is a big pharma scam and I don't need insulin. And do you have anything for cleansing your liver by someone who was so jaundiced they could be mistaken for a school bus? Story 62. 20 years ago, I worked with a guy who ate 0 real food. I know this sounds like BS, but I assure you, it is not. He was in his mid-20s when I met him. The only food I ever saw him eat was candy bars and chips. The only thing I ever saw him drink was 2 LTR bottles of Coke, Diet Coke, Fanta, etc. All his teeth were black and he was super skinny. He did not make it to his mid-30s. I never saw anything like it before or since. Story 63. I worked with a guy at the grocery store who would drink a 20 Oz soda before his shift, another for his first break, a third for his lunch break, then another for his last break. 80 Oz of soda in an 8 HR period. 69 grams of sugar per, that's 276 grams. A cup of sugar is 200 grams. He would do this every day I worked with him. I imagine he drank more sugar when he was off the clock. That amount of sugar consumption is just insane to me. Story 64. Beyond just people doing rugs and being fat, I went out with a girl a few times who pretty much consumed Monster energy drinks and 5-hour energy shots rather than drink water or anything else. She was a grad student and said she was always tired. Sometime later, I heard she had to be rushed to the hospital because of heart problems. Story 65. I was working the fry station at my fast food job 20 years ago. My manager was getting ready to go on his lunch break. He took a medium-sized fry, announced he was going to send his blood pressure through the roof, and proceeded to turn the fry salt dispenser upside down over his fries, thus dumping an entire basket's worth of salt onto one medium-sized fry. Story 66. I was doing an outdoor summer music festival one year. I was handling video. Another guy was doing audio. We'd be outside for about 14 HRs a day for 15 straight days. I was drinking 3 gallons of water a day. He was bringing 2 2-liter bottles of ginger ale every day. I asked him if that was his favorite flavor or if there was a different reason, and he cited the perceived health benefits of ginger. Unfortunately, there was no actual ginger in ginger ale, but there is 32 g of sugar in each serving and 6 servings in a 2L bottle. He was ingesting almost 400 grams of sugar a day just from this. The suggested total daily sugar intake for an adult male is about 30 kg. He was kind of a douchebag, so watching him slowly kill himself was okay by me. Story 67. I never post, but reading all this stuff was a gut punch. By the grace of God, I haven't fallen into full addiction, but I've been pretty damn close. My parents were complicated and tried their best, but there was definitely neglect and abuse that I'm just now getting therapy for, 30 months. Looking back, I never realized I was eating my feelings during every fight, door slam, etc. I also dated some terrible people in high school that sexually abused me. I literally spent countless nights eating gas station snacks and watching romantic movies. I thought I was being a silly teenager, and now I'm realizing I was coping so hard. I'm breaking down in tears with this realization. I still struggle with eating, but again, by God's grace, I have a wonderful, amazing wife who's teaching me how to have a healthy relationship with food. We also have a beautiful son, and he is well-nourished and happy. This is so heavy. It doesn't make me feel better to know I'm not alone. It breaks my heart to see how many people are suffering with it tenfold. Story 68. Probably not the worst, but the one that comes to mind was going to a chubby kid's house after school as a kid. The first thing he did was open the fridge. Then he grabbed a stick of salted butter and a jar of sugar and brought it over to the couch. He sat in front of the TV, dipping the stick of butter into the sugar and it munching on it like a candy bar. Fresh dip for each bite. Dude finished the whole stick of butter, then dipped his greasy fingers in the sugar and licked it off. Story 69. When I worked at a smoke shop, we had a regular who was easily 400 or 500 pounds. Would often come in with a full 18-piece KFC meal, 4 or 5 sides, and a 2L of Pepsi. This man would devour half the bucket, slam half the Pepsi in one go, then proceed to crush the rest of the chicken and sides, followed by the rest of the Pepsi. Took him 10-15 minutes to eat it all. Shoveled it in faster than he could breathe the whole time, just spraying food chunks over the counter. His van had no mirrors and garbage up to the ceiling in every seat but the driver's. I had to get my boss to tell him to come when she worked because he smelled like what I'd describe as a sun-rotted corpse. Story 70 LOL. Just this afternoon, there was a kid, girl, maybe 8, and her sister. She was pulling a small plastic bag over her head while her dad was shopping. He looked at her repeatedly while she had her whole head in that bag, but did not stop her. The bag was tight around her head. She could barely fit it over her face, so it was just the right size to kill her if she did it in the back of his car on the way home, for example, and passed out before realizing she's in trouble. Story 71. I spent over 4 months continuously blacked out on Ambien and Sonata, once while living at my best friend's boyfriend's house. I liked how it changed my personality to a more fun person when I was on it. Still wish I could be like Ambien me more often because my normal personality is hella boring TBH. But it literally made me feel like I split my life into 2 separate people, and I liked it. Also allowed me to experience most occasions for the first time twice because I wouldn't remember what I did unless I was in the same state I did it in. Was truly a great time in the moment. But I stopped immediately when I got diagnosed with cancer. May or may not have been related to what I was doing, but I'm not entirely sure and don't want to blame them for creating such an amazing medication if it wasn't caused by that 100%. Cancer-free now though, but I still have like 20 other medical conditions, so still need my meds, and still wish I could go back to that era of my life nearly every single day. Story 72. My old coworker would smoke a pack a day, and the only thing she'd consume all shift was Coke and Red Bull. If she did put any food on her stomach, it was almost always a cheesesteak, plus cheese fries. The crazy thing is, aside from her less than stellar teeth, she doesn't look bad at all, and one of the tiniest women you'll meet. I'd never guessed that her daily routine was as unhealthy as it is. Story 73. I knew a guy who was really into whippets. He ended up doing so many over the years his brain was fried. He could barely remember anything or make a coherent sentence. Similarly, I knew a guy who smoked so much weed over a period of time, he also ended up with his personality and brain so severely altered, he was completely different. That aren't labeled as addictive can still take their toll kids. Story 74. At like 3 a.m. in the roughest part of town, in a town that as a whole is already known for being the biggest shithole in the area, I saw a pregnant girl standing in the middle of the main road with a crack pipe in one hand, and with other hand, she was just swinging a big piece of wood. I walked up to her and asked if she was all right. She immediately got furious and said, "What a stupid question. Why would you even ask me that?" At first, she was threatening to hit me with the wood, but I convinced her to move on to sidewalk and ended up talking to her for over an hour. At some point, a cop car pulled up and he asked if everything was okay. She was still holding the crack pipe and wood, but the cops still drive off after both of us said it was fine. I guess the cop couldn't be bothered, or didn't see the pipe and just ignored the piece of wood in her hand. Her life story was the saddest out of any person I met. Her whole life she was abused in every way, was drug addict for most of it, and spent time in jail. Even her pregnancy was from grape by an abusive ex. Sometimes when I walk by the spot I met her, I still wonder what happened to her. I hope she got better, but unfortunately, there very likely wasn't a good ending to a story like hers. Story 75. I'm no skinny mini by any means. I'm 5'10", and 220 nefraldrables currently. I'm a 48-year-old guy, but I see women my age in their late 40s these days having to use mobility scooters provided by the grocery stores. The fat hanging off the sides of their asses is unreal. It's like trash bags full of fat hanging off each side. I'm amazed the scooter can even support it. Story 76. I have a friend whose life runs purely on external stimulants and depressants. He sleeps late, so uses coffee to wake up, needs an extra kick for gym, so takes pre-workout, needs to relax for school, so smokes weed. But he's going out tonight, so rips lines of where he pops Molly for a good time and drinks. But now he's too active. He then smokes weed again to come down. And the cycle continues. Story 77. In high school in Chicago, I watched a grown man ask a seemingly random grown woman to pop his ass pimple at a bus stop. She agreed, and my friends and I watched in horror as pus and blood shotgunned into the plexiglass, and the man groaned very sensually as it happened. I think that is more unhealthy than the time I saw a 300-plus pound man attempt to jump a wooden fence that collapsed under him as he broke his back. But they are both top contenders for me. Story 78. My uncle used to only drink Pepsi. Now he's diabetic, surprise, so he only drinks Diet Pepsi. My dad drinks black coffee and smokes cigarettes all day long. He was homeless for years, so his diet wasn't, and still isn't great either. We're working on it. He's diabetic too. Surprisingly, only 2 people in my family are kind of overweight. Not those 2. Thank God for my health, nut mom. Story 79. In a cafe in South London in the 80s, we stopped for a breakfast before going to work. There were 4 bin men sat at a table opposite from us, and they were all eating with their grime-covered gloves still on. One of them had egg yolk run off his fork onto his glove, and he licked it off. The dirty, fat slob. And this always stuck in my mind. Story 80. Not a story, but mind-blowing how many people don't drink water. I bet it's even more common than you think. I find it hard to remember, so I developed one healthy habit. I don't have many. First thing I do each day is drink a huge glass of water. At least if I drink nothing but tea the rest of the day, I did that. Story 81. Unintentionally or deliberately? Deliberately, short of suicides, attempts, or intentional disfigurement, probably injecting bleach into their own leg to try to treat a staph infection. Didn't seem to be going well for them when I left the hospital. Unintentional. I've seen a lot of damage from long-term neglect or cumulative bad decisions. Throwing out a random example, I once had a patient with a horrific cancerous tumor on her face that stunk like you wouldn't believe and looked like a nightmare. Turns out she'd been treating it herself at home with eggplant instead of going to a doctor for a year, while it just kept getting worse. Story 82. My co-worker has horrifically bad diabetes, and I watched him eat like 3 boxes of Girl Scout cookies a night for 2 weeks, along with like 2 full meals from various fast food places. This isn't much different than he always eats, but it was easy to track the Girl Scout cookies. Other times, if he's offered something small, like a fun-sized candy bar, he will say he can't because of his diabetes. I don't know much about insulin pumps, but he mentioned once that he always uses the max to make up for the sweets he eats. Story 83. I watched 2 guys using one of those giant cement cutting saws in a basement, cutting a new exterior door with no eye protection or mask. One was even smoking. They did it from inside. When they finally got through all the cinder blocks, a cloud poured out for several minutes. I assume they are both dead. Story 84. I knew a girl with Munchausen syndrome. She started out draining her own blood from her port, baffling doctors as to why she's losing so much blood and needs transfusions. This then led to her faking a skin disease when it was really just her self-mutilating. This went on for years and got to the point where her calves were literally rotten to the bone, and you could not only see bone, but see through massive holes she dug in her legs. She ended up getting both legs amputated above the knee. Then, of course, the mystery disease came back, and she picked apart her stumps, amputated to the hips. She has since moved on to her hair and teeth. She's basically bald and completely toothless. Story 85. I haven't personally seen all of it, but my mom's boyfriend, he used to be a chain smoker. Used to be a heavy drinker. Eats an absolutely ridiculous amount of sweets. Has a very sedentary lifestyle. Refuses to go to the doctor regardless of what symptoms he has. When he was about 60, he was diagnosed with 2 types of cancer and a rare autoimmune disease, basically a death sentence. Now he's 70 and still kicking. At this point, I'm convinced he's immortal. Story 86. A woman I knew had chronic health problems, including an autoimmune condition. She was a smoker. She coughed nonstop. She insisted that she needed cigarettes for her health. Like, okay, if you try to quit, then you feel worse. Of course, that's how addiction works. It doesn't mean cigarettes are good for you. Stop lying to yourself and everyone else. If you want to smoke your lungs out, that's your business. But quit pretending that it's helping your health when it's clearly doing the opposite. Story 87. In high school, we used to have one of those snow cone trucks pull up to our school every Friday. I'm pretty sure it was Kona Ice. It was one of the trucks where they just give you a cup of ice and you dispense the flavored syrup yourself. A friend of mine brought 2 Chalmers 20 Oz cups and filled both of them with the flavored syrup, then drank both of them during lunch. After he finished the first one, we begged him to stop, but he said it was too good. He began bringing the same cups every Friday, filling them up, usually with like 4 or 5 flavors per cup, and drinking them during lunch. Story 88. Maybe eat like 80 hot dogs in 12 minutes? I haven't seen this with my own eyes, but doing lethal levels of fentanyl would qualify. On YouTube, I have seen an experienced parachute instructor forget his parachute as he jumped out of an airplane. That turned out to be very unhealthy. Likewise, here on Reddit, I've seen tons of motorcycle daredevils turn into meat crayons and so on. All very unhealthy. I sometimes eat instant ramen late into the night, and other times eat a full bag of chips, but that's fairly mild in comparison. Story 89. For about 4 or 5 years when I was a teenager, I would huff computer duster around 20-30 times a day, as well as various other substances, whatever I could get my hands on TBH. Combine that with a solid diet of beer, rolling tobacco, and nothing but rice cakes and scrambled eggs. I could literally feel my brain cells disappearing. About a year in, I started getting random blackouts in the middle of the day, while sometimes not sleeping for 2-3 days at a time, which led to a lot of hallucinations and delirium. I couldn't hold a job if my life depended on it. When I finally got help for it, I got extremely scared because my drug and alcohol counselors said most people never recover properly, cognitively, from that kind of abuse. Thankfully, that was around 6 years ago. I still haven't properly recovered cognitively. I have addressed a lot of the issues that led to my polysubstance drug addiction and have tried to move past the monumental pain and suffering I caused my family and friends. Sadly, I think those issues will stay with me forever at this point. Story 90 saw a guy huff a can of Freon at a party. He started foaming at the mouth and seizing. All except a handful of us split fast. We waited on the paramedics and eventually the cops to show. Guy didn't make it. He was gone before we even dialed emergency services. It's been 31 years and the memory of the scene, smells and sounds are still vivid in my memory. Story 91. Back in my wild days of snorting questionable substances, I ended up at this sesh in a massive mansion because apparently bad decisions require luxury settings. Everyone's noses started clogging up from the powders, and the host, bless their rotten soul, pulled out a nasal spray like they were about to save lives. Except instead of spraying it near their nose like civilized creatures, people started full-on jamming it up their snouts, passing it around like a vape at a sixth form party. One by one, clogged and crusty, just squirt, squelch, next. I sat there, absolutely fried, watching this communal germ stick make its rounds, wondering if I should call an ambulance or an exorcist. Honestly, it felt like I was witnessing the world's nastiest relay race. 10-10 would not recommend. My brain still hasn't recovered. Stay safe put there, humans. No wonder my OCD is next level now. Maybe I'm just traumatized. Story 92. When I worked at Starbucks, we'd have a customer who came in every day who was severely overweight and ordered the same thing. A venti caramel frap with extra caramel sauce on top and on the inside of the cup. I don't even remember all the syrup types they'd want added, but one day we did the math on it and the sugar was around 170 grams in that cup. Pure diabetes. I don't even know how it was edible. It had to have been so insanely sweet. I get sick just thinking about it. I also wonder how they're doing today. Story 93. I work at an amusement park. There's also a football stadium on property that we have to clean up. We were cleaning the stadium and a former coworker of mine found and ate pretzel that was just chilling on the ground. He proceeds to do the same thing with Skittles that were just lying on the ground outside of the packaging. Story 94. I've seen a girl pretend to be pregnant after the guy she liked dumped her and went back to his other GF. She took it so far as making a TikTok 8 months later holding a baby doll. His mom took her to court for custody, and when they found out she made it all up, she then told them she had an abortion. Also untrue. His mom slapped her on the court steps. She was a horrible human all around. Story 95. I used to work with a gentleman who was one of the coolest guys I ever met, but every day at lunch, he would eat a whole package of some type of deli meat by itself and wash it down with straight margarita mix. Just those two things and nothing else. Sometimes he would follow up with a bag of chips. His eating habits were atrocious. Story 96. In trying to think of the most unhealthy thing, I had some contenders. My work involves people with trauma, so there have been some bad habits there. Ran with so many different druggos over the years. I've seen everything a person could smoke be smoked, but I didn't really feel any of this was worthy of most unhealthy. Then I realized it was my own habits, things I've done that are the most unhealthy. Probably the worst one would be the 6 months of smoking pot seeds stems, likely contributed to the oncoming lung cancer, LOL. So with that realization, I should do something. Just figured these musings might be interesting or helpful to someone. Story 97, 2 things. 1, I worked with a guy who was morbidly obese. He had a gastric band fitted as a last resort, and when he came back to work, he was still sneaking out to McDonald's every day for a Big Mac meal with milkshake every day. He ended up making himself really ill and had to take a long time off to recover. Don't know if he ever managed to lose any weight. 2, my mother developed a heart murmur after a viral infection. She was in hospital under observation. The woman in the bed opposite, who was only my age, which would have been about late 30s, had had a heart attack, would take her oxygen outside with her to the smoker's shelter for a ciggy break. Story 98. I knew someone who would rip through energy drinks all day, every single day, and would primarily only eat candy until dinner. Then they'd eat like 30 calories in a toddler fashion diet. Think chicken nuggets, French fries, ECT. Smoked a pack a day and about 1 kmo in weed. Dude would take a full handle of vodka in a single sitting too. Absolutely crazy. Story 99. Watch my ex go straight for a bottle of vodka after leaving the hospital AOMA after having a seizure because he binge drank without eating for 3 days. He'd been to rehab 4 times at that point, twice with me, and I'm fairly certain he made straight for the airport bar the minute he was released from rehab each time. I kicked him out a week after the hospital incident. I missed a concert I was looking forward to because of that seizure. We were on our way there when it happened, and he yelled at me for it. He told me if the roles were reversed, he'd have gone to the concert, let me go alone to the hospital. The hotel we were at called EMS. That broke something inside me.